I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, February 12, 2019, and this is a Prescott City Council study session. Please call roll.
Mayor Mangarelli?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr?
Here.
Councilman Blair?
Yes.
Councilman Good?
Here.
Councilman Lamerson?
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl?
Here.
Councilman Sischka?
You got it right here.
All are present.
Thank you, Maureen. So we have two items, and we have about an hour here. Actually, we have an hour before we go to exec, so keep that in mind. Let's start with item 3A.
Discussion on a potential city charter provision regarding lease purchase real estate agreements.
Councilman Good, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Mayor. There's been a lot of controversy, of course, on the conditions under which the Hilton Garden Inn property has been contracted for development. And that particular contract is a lease purchase, which is a relatively common mechanism by which property is acquired through a lease with an option to purchase the property at a designated purchase price and with conditions over the course of the lease, which the Hilton Garden Inn project certainly has in their contract. However, looking at the city charter under Article 8, Section 11 and 12, it does discuss how sale and disposition of taxpayer assets, real estate in particular, has to be publicly bid when it's up for sale, so the taxpayers know that their assets are getting the highest particular value when they're disposed of. And also there is a reference to the city manager's ability to negotiate leases of that property without necessarily being publicly disclosed. But there's no mention of a lease purchase. And I think ultimately, under a lease purchase, the property is potentially disposed of to a second party without publicly looking at the highest purchase price that could be acquired. So I felt that this was kind of a loophole in the charter, and since it's a relatively common vehicle in the real estate market, we should have our city charter amended to include provisions for a lease purchase. And again, I think that should be a public process where property is sufficiently appraised, and we solicit bids for that property so that the taxpayers know they're getting the highest value. So that was my purpose for bringing this forward.
Very good. Mr. Pedracki, do you have anything to add in regard to the city charter, to what Councilman Good's talking about here?
Not really. What you would be looking at if you were interested in amending the charter would be referring some language to the voters. So all charter amendments have to be elections. So if it's something you're interested in doing, we're happy to take a look at it. You'll recall, I don't know, maybe 8 months ago, we came forward with a laundry list of changes that we were proposing for charter amendments. And that kind of got lost in the process. Just got to flip something here. Yeah, sure. So what was on the big board before was Article 8, Section 11 and 12 that Councilman Good was referring to. Here's some language that the city attorney's office, in consultation with the clerk's office, came up with regarding potential sale of property. It does not necessarily deal with the issue that Councilman Good brought up, so that's something you should have a discussion about. But what we had suggested in the past was changing the personal property disposition and just getting rid of the dollar amount and referring specifically to the city code. We already have a procurement code that we use that sets the amounts, so that would just make it a little more consistent. And then with the sale of property, we added, this is real property. The council may sell real property after one notice, published notice of sale at least one time, so it's the same language. Continuing on, two, we thought listing the real estate with a licensed real estate broker would give you a little more flexibility in trying to get a piece of property out on the market and get market price. Or three, in a manner determined by the council to be in the best interest of the city. And that's getting more into the economic development perspective of things. I think now you have the right to set certain terms and conditions of how you dispose of property, especially for economic development purposes. And in the council memo, we refer to a case that just came down that says in Arizona, when you are doing economic development, you don't even have to publish a notice of sale. That was a county piece of property, but the county statute, which is Title 11, mirrors Title 9, which is the city statute. So you've got a lot of options. If it's something you're interested in doing, happy to work with the council in presenting you some options before going out to the voters. If it's not something you're interested in changing now, let us know. A potential third option is, do you want to come back to this sort of laundry list of charter amendments? So we're not going out with just one charter change. Elections tend to be rather expensive these days, running, what, Maureen, about $80,000 for a single item. If there was interest in getting this done sooner rather than later, looks like the August election is the next election,
Correct.
27th. So we would have to have everything buttoned up by May 29th. That would include language to be referred to the county for publishing. That would give us an opportunity to get pro and con statements and things like that. So that's what we're looking at. So you tell us.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, Mayor, Council, I spoke just briefly to Mr. Palladini, and I would think, Matt, he mentioned that maybe we should have like a committee, to really get some public involvement if we were to come out with changes to the charter, so it isn't just something that just we are doing.
Right. That the last time we did a charter amendment election, we did go through that process. We had a charter committee
Right.
that proposed various changes to the charter in consultation with the staff.
Sure.
If that's something you're interested in doing, we're happy to do that.
When was that, Matt?
About 7 years ago.
Wow.
Another option is just to do a subcommittee of this particular city council. Maybe choose 3 members to sit on a charter committee and refer back to the main council what changes you would like to see referred out to the people that make most sense.
I'm just thinking time-wise, if we have time to actually get all that done.
I don't think we do. Well, I'll just insert that. When
Yep.
Tammy Lynn brought this forward when she was a councilwoman, she and Jim Lamerson worked hard at going through the charter piece by piece and looking at the antiquated stuff and the stuff that we felt needed to be put in there. And we made some changes, but as we all do, we see things that need to be different. One that's been talked about, Councilman Good has brought up, is the fact that we hold 2 elections rather than hold 2. Maybe we just hold 1. Instead of a primary, we just do a general, which would save this community a lot of money. That would be a charter change. So I think the best way to handle it, rather than jump off the diving board with no water in the pool, is to have a group put together that goes to the charter and red lines it and brings it back to council for change.
Who was on that committee before?
Jim and I were on with Tammy Lynn, and I think Tammy Lynn spearheaded it, if my memory serves me
Some
right, Jim.
public, some from the public as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Councilman Good?
Well, I would agree. If we're going to do a comprehensive analysis of our city charter and recommend changes, that should be a pretty significant deliberative process and get a lot of people involved, since there's so many potential changes that could be proposed. This particular issue, since we are dealing with really kind of a growing development community, plugging this loophole in the interim, I think, would be something that could be done relatively faster. We've got 3 months before we would potentially have to have the language included in the next election. So I think when we're dealing with one issue, that seems reasonable enough to be able to put something together that we could agree on. And in the absence of a actual election to change the city charter, if we had a consensus of how we would deal with a lease purchase option, should it come before us again, we could agree on how we would go about handling that in a public manner. So, in my opinion, I think 3 months should be sufficient to put together a reasonable proposal and put it in front of the voters.
We already have an election, so Maureen, it wouldn't cost us any more money, would it?
No, it won't.
So it's just putting it on the ballot.
Correct.
Well, I would agree with you then, if it's something that
Just the
is-
one item.
Yeah, just the one item.
So it wouldn't cost us to do,
No, because since we have an election in August, it would just be included on that
I
ballot.
think that's a good idea.
and then so, can we follow that through? So then if we did go do a laundry list, so then that list would go in 2021 if we didn't want to pay for a special election?
Yes,
That's
I
what I'm
believe
saying.
so. Yes, it would go into the next
Just
election.
wouldn't want to pay for, have two elections.
No.
But if this is on one, and then the next election would be,
Yeah, I think it would go
2021.
into effect for the 2021 election.
okay.
Councilwoman Scholl?
Billy, you stole my thunder. That was my question. I would agree that if we're going to do one, might as well look at all of them. Although it might be worth considering potentially a special election. I think sometimes issues like this can get lost in the politics of council elections. I mean, when our last election, we had to pass home rule and hardly anyone talked about it or knew what it was. So it may be worth either doing a special election or considering a pretty aggressive PR campaign to get the word out about what these charter changes mean and making sure the public understands what they're voting on.
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have something else?
No, I'm sorry, I just didn't
That's right.
cancel.
Any other comments from the council? I know I have heard from one council member who likes the idea of changing the mayor's term to 4 years. So. Oh, that
Who
fell
that would
flat.
be?
Who's that? I don't know. I don't talk to myself either. Any other thoughts?
So Mayor, what is our conclusion here?
That's what I was going to ask. Is there a consensus to proceed with one issue? And if so, we probably need to start moving in an expedited manner.
Right, that's what I'm hearing, unless you guys hear it differently, is that we come up with fixing this lease purchase and get it on this ballot.
Okay.
Doesn't cost any extra.
Is there general consensus to pursue a larger charter review committee? And if so, we should try to establish that maybe in the next few months at some point. And I would say that in the interest of transparency and public participation, having a sizable private sector, public citizen component would make a lot of sense.
I would agree with that, but I think that we should maybe look at the timeline, though, of 2021, so we don't have to pay for another election.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Are you suggesting that we put a committee together, but they try to get it done, obviously, here for the August election?
No,
No.
not this August.
Okay.
No, I think that's
No, not as a comprehensive city
comprehensive.
charter
That's going to
review.
really take some time.
So you're advocating for, or maybe many of us are advocating for, just doing this
One item.
one item on this election?
If the case is we're looking at 2021, you probably don't want to start a charter review
No,
committee for
that's
another
right.
6 months
I agree.
or a year.
Exactly.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Having been through this process in the past, anytime you go to change the public's charter, you need to involve the public. Okay, it's not the
agree.
purview of the council just to demand, here's what we're gonna do. Okay? So that would be my first input. With regard specific to this particular topic that brought this forward, Section 11 talks about the council may lease any land, building, part thereof owned by the city by public auction, sealed bid, or negotiation All such leases shall be approved by ordinance by the city council. That's what we're elected to do. Prior to the approval and execution of any such lease. The city shall publish notice of intent to lease city property at least one time per week for 2 weeks. However, the council may, at its discretion, reject any and all offers. All right? So at the end of the day, I don't have a problem asking the public, are they happy with their charter? All right? The council that sits here needs to follow the charter. The charter is what it is. And that's, that is something that the public has asked us to do because they're the ones that approve the charter. So I just want to share that.
Councilman Lamerson, do you have a feel for, would you like to see this one item on the election cycle this August?
I think we need to ask the public, and that would be at the election. That's why we have elections. All right? So therefore, I would think if we have an issue with the charter, let's ask the public.
With this one item, is
Well, yeah, I don't think you have time to put together a public body to go over the charter as a whole. All right? But anytime you change the charter in part or in whole, you need to include the public. At this particular point, we don't have time to go through the whole charter. We only have time to do the one item. So you would definitely ask the public, is this meet with your approval? Because it is their charter.
Good. I'm okay with all that.
So, Mr. Pedracki, do you have marching orders here?
I think so. The city attorney's office, in consultation with the clerk and the manager, will present you with several options in an upcoming meeting to meet that May deadline, and we'll get the discussion going. It's probably going to be more than one discussion, but we can certainly present you with some options that take into account now a hybrid approach of a lease and a sale, the lease purchase option. Got it.
Sounds good. All right. Let's move on to item 3B, please.
Neighborhood Services Update.
Mr. Goodman.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My goal here is to just briefly update you on what's been happening in the Neighborhood Services Division in the last 10 or 12 months or so. Just as a reminder, our mission is to uphold and enforce the codes and to protect the public health, safety, welfare of the citizens while ensuring that every citizen has the right to a safe and clean neighborhood. And we do that by following complaint-driven enforcement, but while the inspectors are out following up on a complaint, they're keeping their eyes open for other violations, especially of a similar nature. That way the neighborhood as a whole is getting treated equally and all are getting to compliance, we can put it that way. Last July, we hired our second code compliance inspector, which was a reclass. We had one inspector and one secretary before. We reclassified that position and now have 2 inspectors. And there was a change in focus as we spoke with you, the council, back in the May timeframe. And we wanted to help citizens reach compliance by offering additional services, and the main one being neighborhood cleanups. And we've done 2 to date so far, and I'm going to go over those in a slide or 2. But just a little bit of data for the current fiscal year, 2019, from July to the end of December, we've received 302 complaints, have opened 432 cases. The inspectors removed about 400 signs from the right-of-way. Those are political signs. And 75% of all the cases that we've opened were resolved within 30 days. And above and beyond that, about 99.9% were resolved within 90 days. And so we're pretty happy with that. And we typically see that it's almost 100% of people that choose to get into compliance, even if it takes a few months and maybe a few visits to their property. Everybody loves pictures, so I have some before and afters. The before pictures are up on top. Just some typical cases, a lot of weed, trash, junk, debris. Those are really 90 to 95% of the cases that we see. You can see a home here, a lot of overgrowth, weeds, and in their carport there's a lot of boxes and storage and whatnot. And then the below pictures, after we've worked with them, they've been able to clean up the yard and clean out the carport a little bit. Junk at the end of a street, for example, and the after picture, the junk has been cleared. some more weeds, especially in the warm months. You can see the weeds there are 12, maybe 15 inches tall. We have a lot of these types of complaints that come in, and especially during the fire season, that's probably the biggest worry and concern that we hear about, and we get many, many calls and online complaints about that. But you can see this property cleaned it up nicely. And then I wanted to show this. So not every single case gets resolved very quickly, and our inspectors really try to work with people on making progress. Some people, because of physical or financial disabilities, they might not be able to clean it up as quickly as we would hope, within the 30 days per se. So we work with them to get it progressing. And you can see the top picture, there's a lot of junk and debris and trash and things piled up in the yard. And the bottom picture, it's not 100% clean and clear. There's some wood there and some other things in the yard, but they're making progress. And so we work with them on a monthly basis. And if they are making progress, even if it's slow, we try to be patient and try to help that go along. Now, if they start to go backwards and start accumulating more and things start to build up, then it's a different story, and that could lead to citation. But again, 99% of the time, eventually they will clean it up, and mostly within about 3 months. And our neighborhood cleanups. You can see Mayor Pro Tem with her little sister there. They came to the July cleanup, and that was in the Dexter neighborhood. We had over 45 volunteers, which was wonderful. We had Habitat for Humanity. We had a sober living home who brought 20 plus young men to help clean up, and some Rotary groups. And there were 5 tons of trash collected just on that Saturday, and it was really just half a day. So we were pretty proud about that. It was the first one that the city's had in years, and so we tried to spread the word, and we were happy about that. We were even happier when we found, and I'll show some pictures here. There's the roll-offs coming off. Solid waste helped a lot. Obviously, we were at Prescott High School. They were a great partner. Let us use their parking lot, and a truck coming in with his bed full. Cleanup number 2, this was in November, and it was the other half of the Dexter neighborhood that we couldn't get to the first time. We had, again, over 40 volunteers from a lot of the same groups. We even added a Boy Scout troop or 2, and then our fire department, one of the crews came by between calls and spent about an hour cleaning up a large portion of a neighborhood, and they collected themselves a lot of trash and things out of the city right of way and off the sidewalks and things like that. And I apologize, that picture shifted. At the bottom bullet point says 8.5 tons of trash was collected, which is great. So we were really happy about that. And there's some pictures of the cars lined up to fill up the roll-off dumpsters there at the high school. And finally, the next cleanups that are coming up, we are currently working with Prescott Creeks. They have their annual Granite Creek cleanup, and we're going to be working with them to really focus, especially on bringing our volunteers and our contacts and resources that we've gained through doing these neighborhood cleanups to help the Granite Creek corridor. And that's going to help in twofold. One, get it clean, and then number 2, we have the grant money that's come through from the Arizona Water Protection Fund that's going to help us do a master plan in that corridor to look at resources there and improvements. And so we're going to help clean that up before the pictures start being taken, and studies and research and all that goes on in that corridor. And then the map you can see is the section of the city that we will be holding a cleanup on May 4th, Saturday, May 4th. Just to get your bearings, at the north is Gurley Street, to the west is Park, and then it goes down to Copper Basin, follows along, and goes across all the way to Bradshaw Street. And so it's a pretty large neighborhood, and we started off small with these cleanups, and we're progressively getting bigger because we're finding that the bigger the net, the more people, and so far we've been able to handle it, as well as a transfer station. They've been able to handle it just fine. So we're reaching a little bit further this time to get some more people. And that is all that I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions or comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Thank you, Mayor. And Tyler, thank you for working on this project. I know you and I have talked about this for quite a long time, and I think it's definitely showing some real results. Some of those neighborhoods were very rough, to say the least, and I think with a diligent code enforcement and engaging the community in upgrading their neighborhoods, it really does support people who want to take pride of ownership. When they know that their neighborhood will be expected to be neat and clean, then they're more willing to keep their own neat and clean instead of a neighbor that makes their property look bad. And I think we're starting to see the attraction of fill-in development as a result of that too. Some of those newer projects in that exact neighborhood have been started within this last year or so. So I think it just shows that with diligent enforcement of our codes, everybody benefits from it. So I want to thank you for your efforts, and I think expanding it will only benefit even a broader section of the community. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that, Tyler. I think, you're adding quality of life, property value, and I think once it's already clean, it's easier for other folks to keep it that way. Mm-hmm. One of the things I like about your approach is it's less emphasis on enforcement and more on collaboration. So you guys are showing up to help and not just tell people what they need to do to comply. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that you've got these neighborhood cleanups and volunteers from the outside coming in and resources coming in, and that you work with people, because you're right. Some folks don't have the resources or the abilities, the physical abilities. And so I think it's smart that we collaborate and really show people that we want to help them versus just enforce code.
And if I could add, it's been great for camaraderie. In these neighborhood cleanups, we have had a lot of anecdotes about volunteers who are out cleaning up trash, and then an elderly person comes out and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" Yeah. They tell them about the cleanup, and they say, "Well, I have this huge piece of junk in my yard, but I can't get it out." And so the volunteer will go get their truck, drive down the street, load it for them, and bring it back. And that wouldn't have happened if we couldn't get out there and help. So that's pretty neat.
You're creating momentum and a culture of helping one another out. So I think it's great. Councilman Blair?
Just a quick question, Tyler. And, I know most of this stuff with the volunteers that you have on the board and everything. What is the cost, do you figure, that it's costing the city with the transfer station, the man hours that we're being assessed?
It's minimal. I don't have a number off the top of my head, but we provide tools if people want to clean up their yards from the Rec Services Department, their community restitution program. That's pretty much free because they're there anyways. The guys who are helping with roll-offs and things like that, a lot of them are working anyways. Transfer station's opened anyways.
So we're talking maybe $1,000?
In the thousands, low thousands. It's nothing.
So there's nothing more beneficial for that $1,000 than to have somebody being able to have their neighborhood cleaned up. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Tyler, we'll make sure next time we get lots of bigs and littles.
That'd be great.
Because it was really fun. Yeah. Mackenzie got tired, but it was fun. We had a good time. Thank you for doing this.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to echo some of what Blair was talking about. It's not just a cleanup measure, it's a public health and safety issue. You get a lot of this stuff, old cars, refrigerators, stoves, etc., off the premises on private property, with their permission, of course. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is removing a public health and safety hazard.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Great job.
Thank you.
All right. Nothing else on the agenda. This meeting is adjourned.